CEOs don't buy tactics, they buy outcomes. And if you can't make that translation as a marketer, you're not just losing the budget conversation, you're losing your seat at the table. I'm Kelly Callahan Poe, host of the Marketing Moms podcast. Today's episode is called Think Like a Marketer, Talk Like a CEO with Rich M. Smith. Rich helps leaders decode why marketing works by translating behavioral science into strategies CEOs can trust. With 30 plus years experience as a CMO and executive driving billions in revenue, major turnarounds in high impact growth areas, Rich is the founder of the Rich M. Smith Growth Studio, host of the Revenue Science podcast, and a frequent speaker who bridges the gap between marketing and the boardroom. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was a really nice introduction. I appreciate that.
Of course, I really wish I had this conversation with you 15 years ago, and I think a lot of marketers will wish that as well. So let's start with the question of walk us through what's actually happening in the room when a marketer is presenting to a CEO the standard awareness and engagement numbers, all those measurable metrics that we track on a regular basis, and then the CEO is unable to process that or maybe even mentally checks out.
Yeah, I think you said it really well in the intro, and that CEOs buy outcomes, not metrics.
Yeah.
And so when you walk into your CEO's office or the boardroom office as a marketer, and you start talking about things like engagement, likes, followers, page views on your website, it's not that these things are not important. We all know that they are. But what the CEO is hearing when you say that is you're talking about these vague, like upper funnel metrics, and they don't see how those metrics connect to the things that they do care about. They care about revenue and churn and cost of acquisition and your net revenue retention rate. All of those, that's what drives the business forward. And that, as a CEO, that's what they're looking for. So, to oversimplify the problem, it's really taking your marketing language, but translating it into language that the CEO actually understands and cares about.
So it's really actually also about communicating more clearly about the outcomes, not just doing marketing speak, right?
Definitely. There are a number of cognitive biases that we all have. I think there's something like 188 that have been documented by researchers, but there's a few key ones that really drive this problem. One is, was written about, or initially written about by Daniel Kahneman, who's a famous behavioral economics. He was really the grandfather or the founder of behavioral economics. And he had this catchy phrase called WYSIATI, which is an acronym for what you see is all there is. And so one thing that, leaders like your CEO, they will overweight what is visible and concrete, like pipeline, revenue, churn, and they will underweight what is probabilistic or delayed, things like brand consideration, preference, views, traffic on the website, right? And so that's one reason why there is this disconnect. There's another one is just basic loss aversion. So, when a business is missing targets, leadership becomes allergic to spend that does not map to near-term revenue. Outcome bias, okay, we've all heard of that one. If revenue is up, everything looks smart and we're all geniuses. If revenue's down, everything looks suspicious, especially marketing, right? So that's another one that causes this problem. And the last is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means that we look for information and data that support views that we already have. And so that's what happens when you walk into the board meeting or the executive boardroom, and marketing is showing dashboards that prove what marketing says matters is working. Finance shows dashboards that show that spend needs scrutiny. It's sort of everyone's got their own numbers. And as the CEO, you're kind of at a loss. How do you put all that together? And your default is to go to what's immediate and obvious within the business.
Which one of those four behavioral science principles that you mentioned do you see derailing marketers the most?
I think it's really probably loss aversion derails your marketing initiatives the most. And that comes back to also, the short-term thinking. It's hard to pull those two apart, but part of what's driving very short-term thinking, in other words, quarter by quarter You know, as a marketer, it can take 6 months to a year to change the trajectory of an organization or a product line or et cetera, right? Telling me that I have to get something done by the end of this quarter. Well, it's the end of March right now. What am I going to do in the next 2 weeks? Or it's really pretty much impossible. So, as a marketer, you got to think about, how do I extend those time horizons for the projects that we're working on, and then chunk them into digestible quarterly or monthly, whatever depending on your organization's culture is, bite-sized pieces that lead you to that final outcome. And then you're talking about metrics that can be measured in the short term, because it's metrics on progress towards that long-term outcome.
So what you're talking about really is this 6-part CEO translation layer for presenting marketing strategy, almost like a translator for CEO speak to marketing speak, and vice versa. Can you walk us through this?
Yeah, sure. There really are 6 things that I think should be part of your presentation to your CEO, to your board. First is the business goal. What are we trying to change? And put it in terms of ARR growth, revenue growth, churn, acquisition cost reduction, margin, right? So what's the goal? What are the constraints? So what's stopping it today? Is it pipeline quality? Is it adoption? Is it pricing power? Is it sales cycle? Next, what is your strategic bet? So what will we do differently? Is it positioning, segment focus, different channels, different offer, right? The mechanism, why will it work? What's the why behind the strategy? Is it driving better customer behavior, more proof points, et cetera, right? Number 5 is economics. So what does a win look like in dollars? ROI, payback, right? And then the last is the decision ask, right? What are you asking leadership to approve? Is it budget, headcount, priority, trade-offs with other projects? Right. And so if you think about your structuring your communication with those 6 pieces or pillars in that structure, you will have a much better, much more effective conversation with your leadership team and your CEO.
As a follow-up to that, you also talk about a metric Rosetta Stone for translating marketing metrics to executive outcomes, which is similar. Can you explain this reframe?
Yeah, it is similar. And so what I've done is think through some terms that marketers commonly use and translate them to, okay, well, how should you actually talk about this to your CEO? So let's say you're using a metric like followers or reach. Okay. Important metrics to know, but when you're talking to your CEO, you really want to talk about penetration of your ICP, your ideal customer profile, right? Are we in the right rooms? If your metric is engagement, what you say to the CEO is we're measuring message resonance. So does the market get what we're saying, right? Traffic is demand capture capacity. All right. So in other words, it's not about, oh, we got these number of people on our website. This is our potential demand that is out there that we can capture. Right. Leads and MQLs, translate that into pipeline creation cost and conversion quality. Conversions, talk about cost of acquisition drivers. Brand awareness, talk about pricing power, conversion efficiency over time. And that's an important one I just want to double click on for a second. A lot of the CEOs that I talk to really discount the value of a brand.
It's amazing to me, actually.
And partly because of, things we talked about before, temporal discounting, overweighting short-term objectives versus long-term objectives. But no, that's part of what drives it. But it's because it just feels unmeasurable and soft. But if you frame it as, look, the reason we want to invest in our brand is that's what's going to drive pricing power. And that's what's going to improve our acquisition cost and conversion efficiency over time. So just wanted to hit that one a little bit closer because I think it's just so important.
Well, and again, it doesn't just drive pricing power, it drives choice.
Oh, 100%.
The more you're aware of a brand versus the other brands, and you should be testing that on an annual basis, where you fall in that lineup and how if you've spent more money this year, did your brand increase? So those are important things as a marketer to be able to show to your CEO. I spent your money well. I was able to increase your brand awareness by 10%. We're now just under the second competitor, and we could potentially reach them if we continue to spend at this level, type thing.
Yeah. But when you frame that to your CEO, you frame it as the objective is not brand awareness. And I've done this before. It's like, well, we need to increase brand awareness. And they're like, well, why do I care about brand awareness, right? The objective is pricing power, cost efficiency of acquisition, improving conversion rates, improving choice. So that's sort of that's a great example of that translation that we as marketers need to make, because I've had those conversations. Well, we need to spend X on brand, and the CEO's like, there's no way we're spending that. Why would I do that? That seems like a total waste of money. So the way that you bridge that gap is by framing it in terms of outcomes that they will understand, that do matter and drive the business.
I would probably love to talk more on that topic because I think it's an important one. But let's move on to the next question, which is, I like this question because marketing isn't necessarily aligned with how a CEO looks at an organization. And you posit the question, what if we treated our marketing budget like an investment portfolio, as if you were the CFO of the company and not the head of marketing? What do you mean by that?
In my experience in the C-suite, the one C-level executive that is relied upon more than any other by the CEO is the CFO.
Yeah.
They're typically pretty much joined at the hip. So because of that, when you frame a marketing project or a marketing investment, if you can frame it in the way that a CFO would frame it to their CEO, you have a much greater likelihood of, one, getting them to understand what you're asking for, and two, approving it. And so that would be things like, what I like to do is break initiatives into really three buckets. They're either harvest, build, or explore. So harvest means, hey, we're going to protect revenue now. So retention, life cycle, conversion rate, win rate, enablement, things like that. Build means, here, we're creating future demand. These are projects like brand, category narratives, things of that nature. And then explore are, hey, here are the controlled experiments that we're going to do. New channels we want to test, new segments we want to test, new offers, new messaging. And breaking them down into those three things to say, like, hey, this is a build investment, or this is a harvest investment. And here's how we want to go about it. And really try to manage those projects as if they were an investment portfolio, because the reality is it's somebody's money that's being invested in those projects, right? And it could be, if you're a private company, that you're using the capital that the company has. If you're a public company, maybe it's coming out of profits or other borrowing, but somebody is paying for that. And if you treat it like an investment, your CEO is going to react a lot more positively to that, because it's, again, in terms that they understand, like, we're going to invest in creating this outcome. All of the tactics and all of the things that lead to that are kind of secondary to that. They don't really care as much about that. What they care about is the outcome and getting to that outcome.
So let's say a business is in distress or missing targets. How do you recommend a marketer recalibrate that mix?
Yeah, there's no real simple answer to that. I think one thing that is common to look for is, are we really aligned on what it is that we're trying to achieve? Does everybody in the leadership team have a good understanding of what the most important objectives are for the organization? Have those objectives been filtered down to and shown to people, like how what they're doing on a day-to-day basis attaches to those objectives? Fostering that kind of alignment throughout an organization is really critical, whether you're growing successfully by leaps and bounds, or you're trying to get yourself on a higher growth trajectory. really building that alignment is foundational. Another thing that I would say is, take a close look at what your customers are saying on sales calls. As a CMO, I've done ride-alongs with salespeople in a B2B environment. I've listened to Gong recordings in a B2B environment. I've also walked the sales floor in a B2C environment and plugged in next to sales representatives to hear what customers are actually saying. Because if your salespeople are getting into their sales presentation and you're starting to get like questions about, well, can you go back to that? I didn't really understand that prior slide, or then that your message is not resonating. And that's another really key point, because if your message is not resonating, then you're not attracting the people who are in your ideal customer profile effectively. And it doesn't matter what the tactics are after that, you're probably not going to succeed.
Got it. One of the things that I thought was the most provocative in our initial chat stat that you provided was from Gartner that cited that 40% or more of CMOs who push for bigger brand budgets without connecting to business outcomes will lose C-suite influence. What does that actually look like in practice, and how do you recover from that?
Yeah, look, I've personally experienced that. I wish that I had this conversation with me 15 years ago too. But yeah, I think the reason it happens is because of everything that we've been talking about. If you go in and you are simply talking about a brand campaign and building brand awareness, and you're not connecting that to business outcomes, what the CEO is going to hear in their head while you're talking about brand awareness, they're going to hear boondoggle. They're going to hear, you're wasting my money. They're not going to understand why that's important, because you haven't told them how that ties to the outcomes that they care about. So if you just talk about those high-level metrics that marketers understand, like brand awareness, but you're not connecting them to outcomes, you're eroding your credibility within the C-suite. And that's, I think, the root cause of, what Gartner found in their research was that CMOs that do that, have 40% of them lose influence within the C-suite. And it's not just the CEO, the CFO, the other, COO, CI. It's all important that they understand why what we're doing ties to business outcomes that they care about.
You also described something called the monthly growth review as the meeting that fixes alignment faster than any dashboard. Can you walk us through what marketers need to do for CEOs to embrace their strategies?
Yeah, so a way that I like to run those kind of meetings, if you have, let's say, an hour, you start with a scoreboard. And the scoreboard should be, again, metrics that the CEO cares about: ARR, churn, acquisition cost, pipeline coverage, margin, et cetera. Next, you go to drivers. So what moved those numbers, up or down? Next is, okay, what is the market truth behind that? What are customers saying or doing that's different? Now that we've seen these three things, what decisions are we going to make? What are we going to double down on? What are we going to cut or pause, right? And then finally, asks. And those are, what resources do you need? What do you need leadership to do? What trade-offs are there with other projects that are happening? Those things. So I think if you think through having those 5 points on your agenda when you're doing your marketing meeting with your CEO or leadership, I've just found that to be a much more effective way to make sure that they understand what you're asking for, what you're doing, and are aligned to it, because they can see how it's tied to the business outcomes that the business cares about.
So one last question, which is one that I've been challenged with over the years as a marketer or working within an advertising agency environment. I frequently have found that many CEOs may give me 4 or 5 objectives, and they may most likely give me very little budget with which to do all 4. And I frequently have to go back and say, I can't achieve all 4 objectives with this budget. Pick one. Talk to me about how those conversations should be held, because that to me is a thing that comes up all the time. Everyone,
Right.
everyone wants to throw something in the bucket. The board wants to do this. This department wants to do that. Another products company wants to promote a little app that they got going on. We can't do it all with the money that we have. So to me, that's the biggest challenge that marketers have is kind of corralling reality of what you have versus the budget.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, many times where you're given a set of objectives and you're given a budget and the two just don't align. And it is a critical skill, I think, for marketers who want to move into the C-suite to be able to deal with those situations, because it's pretty much constant, right, as you mentioned. And I think it really, the key to success is, again, coming back to the business outcomes. So here are the objectives that I've been given. Here's what I think the business outcomes are that we're looking to achieve from these. Okay. Then you kind of ground everybody in that framework. All right, and then you move on to, okay, well, last year or last quarter or prior history showed that to achieve that similar change in the business outcomes, it took X amount of investment. Great. Okay. Then you just take it and look back and say, okay, well, now we have the formula for what's worked in the past. Let's apply that formula to the objectives going forward. And this is the budget that it would suggest that we need. Okay, that budget's going to be a lot higher than the one you were given, typically, right? Then you have the conversation around, all right, well, if we achieved this before, what makes us think that we're going to do better with a smaller budget in the future? And I obviously wouldn't say that to a CEO exactly how I just said it, because that might not go over so well. But you might say something like, in order for us to do this with this budget based on what we've done before, we need to do some things differently. Because if we do it the same way, we would need a much larger budget to achieve that objective. So we're going to have to change something. And we can go to work as marketers on what we think we can change to bridge that gap, but the reality is we're probably not going to be able to bridge it completely. And here's why. So again, it's really important to make sure that you're speaking in terms of business outcomes as a business person and not using marketing terms and marketing metrics when you have those conversations.
I think I've found in the past when I have had a situation where there's 4 or 5 different goals and you go back to the CEO to get more information or prioritize those goals, that several of them may actually be box ticking. I was asked to do XYZ. I don't care how much you spend on it. I just need to do something. I've checked that box. And that's a challenging conversation to have, but it's a clarity conversation.
No, 100%. And that is the reality. I mean, we've probably all been there. Where you're asked to do something is really not core to your objectives, and that it's going to eat your budget and probably not going to help you get closer to your ultimate goal, and it's going to eat the time of your team, etc. And I think you've got to be able to push back in those situations and push back in a way that's going to be effective with your CEO. Right. Ultimately, yeah, they probably want to check that box, but how badly do they want to check that box? They want to check it so badly that it's going to take away from something else that might drive a business outcome that they care about. And then the question that you put back to them is, which do you want? Do you want this business outcome, or do you want a lower business outcome and check the box?
Yeah.
You can't have both.
So back to branding for a minute. What is your perception in working with clients over the last couple of years, post AI world, with regards to branding? Are companies less focused on branding and more focused on direct response, marketing and advertising, just to get the leads into the funnel? Or is brand as important as it ever was?
I think it's just as important as it ever was, and perhaps in some ways becoming even more important in a lot of ways. You think about the impact that AI search has had on the way I mean, we're marketers, but we're all consumers as well in our
Yeah.
business and personal lives. And, we're all using AI tools these days, right? And things like AI search have really changed the game because asking an AI search engine for a recommendation on a product or service is kind of like talking to a trusted friend.
Yeah.
Whatever they tell you, you're going to weight a lot more highly than anything if you just went and ran your own organic search for that same term and got pages and pages of websites and links that could possibly solve your problem. So we have to think about, as marketers, I think there's really kind of two dimensions to how we need to think about AI. And the first dimension is adoption. Adoption, I mean, what are the tools and processes that you're going to bring into your organization that are going to make you more efficient, more cost effective, provide a better customer experience, et cetera. So, and that's, I think, the side that most people focus on is the tools, right? What's the shiny new object? What's the new hot platform, et cetera.
Yeah.
What I think is being undervalued is what I would call adaptation. So, how are we adapting our go to market strategy for the AI reality that our buyers or decision makers are going through? Right? Are we doing things so that we're going to show up in AI search? Are we doing things that are going to have us show up in places where our buyers typically are or might be thinking about a product or a solution that we're offering? Right? We have to make sure that we're showing up in those places. And brand, once you show up, brand is really it's a set of associations in the
Yeah.
consumer's mind with your logo, your organization, your company name. And being intentional about how you're setting those expectations, how you're setting those assumptions in the mind of your consumer just leads to the things that we talked about before. Pricing power, right? Improved conversion rates, lower acquisition costs, lower churn, right? More referral business. It's a virtuous cycle that just pays for itself, but it's a long-term investment. It's not a short-term investment. And that's where we run into problems.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights today, Rich. I will provide links to your website and your contact information in the transcript. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and thanks for joining.
All right. Thanks so much, Kelly. I really enjoyed the conversation.